Listen, what I'm about to walk you through isn't your typical international spat over dairy quotas or lumber prices. We're witnessing something that historians will probably mark as a turning point in North American relations, and most people have no idea how serious this has become. Today's date? January 30th, 2026. And the partnership between Washington and Ottawa, one that's been the gold standard for peaceful international cooperation, is basically in free fall. We're talking about terminated diplomatic talks, a defense alliance that's barely holding together, and an economic relationship that took generations to build, now coming apart faster than anyone thought possible. Let me set the stage. Everything changed during a December 2024 meeting in Florida. The sitting US president floated an idea to Canada's then leader that seemed absurd at first. Maybe Canada should just become another American state to dodge the incoming trade penalties. People who were in that room thought it was some kind of provocative joke. Turns out it wasn't. Fast forward to the January 2025 inauguration, and territorial expansion became official presidential policy, not suggested, not hinted at, declared openly as a goal of the administration. Throughout that year, the messaging got increasingly pointed, Canadian leaders being called governors, social media posts about how Canadians would get better healthcare and lower taxes by giving up their independence, and constant reminders at international forums that this offer was on the table. By February 2025, we saw 25% duties slapped on nearly everything crossing the border, with energy getting a slight break at 10%. Then August rolled around, and those rates jumped to 35%. Each escalation came with the same pitch: accept statehood, and the economic pain stops. Now here's where we need to get into specifics, because the we can go it alone narrative falls apart when you look at the numbers. The northern neighbour ships roughly 4.3 million barrels daily of heavy crude southward. That's about 60% of all imported oil. Now sure, America produces massive amounts of oil, more than anyone else on Earth, but there's a critical mismatch. American refineries were engineered decades ago for heavier crude grades. The lighter domestic oil, it gets sold overseas because the infrastructure can't handle it efficiently. This creates a bizarre loop, exporting what's drilled domestically while importing what the refineries actually need. Fixing this would require retooling industrial facilities that cost hundreds of billions and would need to shut down during conversion. The supply shock alone would send prices through the roof. Then there's the electrical grid. Over 5 million American households get their power from the north, particularly in border states and the Midwest. This isn't supplemental power. This is essential grid capacity keeping critical infrastructure operational. When provincial leaders threatened to cut exports in response to tariffs, they weren't bluffing. They were pointing out an uncomfortable vulnerability. Now let's talk about manufacturing, because the automotive sector really illustrates how deeply woven these economies are. A single vehicle component might cross the international boundary 6 separate times during production, stamped in one location, assembled into a subcomponent elsewhere, integrated into a larger system in another facility, sent back for quality checks, then forward for final assembly integration. This isn't waste, it's optimization refined over decades. Companies identified where each specialized manufacturing step could be executed most cost-effectively while maintaining quality standards. You can't just tear that apart and rebuild it domestically without massive capital expenditure, multi-year delays, and significantly higher production costs. But here's something else that should keep strategic planners awake at night. America imports between half and all of its supply for 41 out of 50 minerals classified as critical by geological surveys. We're talking about materials essential for smartphones, electric vehicles, AI computing, renewable energy systems, precision weaponry, missile guidance, and advanced targeting. China controls roughly 60% of global production, not because they have all the deposits, but because they invested in extraction, processing, and refining infrastructure decades ago. And Beijing has repeatedly shown willingness to weaponize these supplies through export restrictions. The logical alternative: the northern neighbour has vast reserves of cobalt, graphite, lithium, rare earths, nickel, chromite, zinc, platinum, copper, and more. One region in northern Ontario alone spans about 5,000 square kilometres, with deposits experts rank among the world's most significant. Plus the stable democratic governance, business-friendly environment, skilled workforce, and existing infrastructure to develop these resources at scale. But instead of partnership, we've got threats and tariffs. The apparent strategy is economic coercion. Apply enough pressure until the other side accepts whatever terms are demanded. Except that assumes they have no alternatives, no leverage, and no will to resist. And that's where things get really interesting, because the response has been methodical and increasingly effective. Initial impact was severe. Exports southward dropped 26% between January and April 2025. But something interesting happened next. By May 2025, exports to everywhere else hit record highs. Businesses recognized the American market had become unreliable and pivoted hard toward other opportunities. Active negotiations started with China, India, and European countries. The new Prime Minister traveled to Germany with business delegations including critical mineral executives. Security partnerships formed with the EU. Official targets got set to double non-American exports by 2035. And these aren't aspirational. They're backed by signed frameworks and committed investment. Here's the key insight. Other countries want what's available. Europe desperately needs alternatives to Chinese minerals. India seeks reliable energy partnerships. Even China, despite Western tensions, recognizes stability in Canadian supply chains. Complete replacement of American trade isn't necessary. Just enough diversification to make the pressure campaign unsustainable. Meanwhile, back in the States, the impact has been measurable and growing. Research institutions estimated typical households would lose about $1,200 in purchasing power from tariffs. That's not a forecast anymore. It's happening. Vehicles, clothing, footwear, appliances, groceries, travel costs, all increasing as duties get passed to consumers. Inflation had finally stabilized near 2% at the end of 2024. Then it spiked again as tariff costs flowed through supply chains. Businesses face an impossible choice: absorb costs and watch margins collapse, or raise prices and lose customers. Most are doing both, cutting where possible and raising where necessary. The result is a slow squeeze on manufacturing competitiveness. Border states feel it acutely. Michigan saw nearly $30 billion in exports to Canada in 2024. Now orders are being cancelled and facilities are idling. Texas refineries deal with crude supply uncertainty. New York and Ohio watch jobs disappear or migrate to other countries. A former ambassador who deeply understands this relationship called the current situation the worst in modern history. He noted something crucial that gets lost in rhetoric. America actually runs a trade surplus with Canada in most categories except energy. The deficit comes almost entirely from oil imports that refineries literally cannot function without. Then came October 24, 2025, and everything changed again. All trade negotiations terminated. The stated trigger? An advertisement quoting a former president criticizing tariffs. That's not diplomacy. That's treating any resistance as personal betrayal. The response from Ottawa was measured but telling, regret expressed, but no panic. By October, they had options they didn't have in February. Export diversification was working. New partnerships were materializing. And critically, public opinion had unified. Polling showed 80% fully opposed to greater American ownership of natural resources, with 70% strongly opposed. Months of economic pressure created not a compliant neighbour, but a politically unified, economically motivated, and strategically diversified counterparty actively reducing dependence on American markets. So why does all this matter beyond just these two countries? Well, let me explain. The trade agreement review comes in July 2026. That's 6 months away. What was supposed to be routine adjustments will instead happen against a backdrop of trade war, terminated talks, and mutual recrimination. Mexico is watching and drawing conclusions about American reliability. Every trading partner globally is watching how America treats its largest trading partner and closest democratic ally. If this relationship can't be maintained, what does that signal? Businesses reconsidering North American investments are asking, why build infrastructure dependent on market access that can be revoked over an advertisement? The geopolitical implications cut even deeper. NATO allies watch an American president threaten territorial annexation of alliance member territory. Article 5 says an attack on one is an attack on all. What happens when the aggressor would be America itself? China watches with satisfaction. Every day the relationship deteriorates. Every day focus stays on trade wars with allies. Every day American credibility erodes. Beijing gains ground. They don't have to do anything except wait for the West to fragment. then offer themselves as a stable alternative. Canadian engagement with China isn't about trust in Beijing over Washington. It's about concluding they can't depend solely on a partner that views relationships as zero-sum competitions. Russia is watching too. If NATO is paralysed by internal conflict, if America alienates its closest allies, what constraints remain on aggression? So let's get real about what going it alone actually means in practice. Higher energy costs from either massive refinery retooling or finding alternative suppliers at longer distances. Potential power disruptions in northern states because electrical imports can't be instantly replaced. More expensive vehicles from rebuilding integrated supply chains. Continued Chinese dominance in critical minerals because the best alternative becomes adversarial instead of cooperative. Sustained inflation from tariff pass-through, reduced global competitiveness from higher input costs. Job losses in border states, investment delays from trade uncertainty, eroding credibility as a reliable partner, Chinese influence expansion, NATO cohesion weakening, overall geopolitical position degrading relative to competitors. And for what? The justifications keep shifting. Sometimes it's the trade deficit, even though that mainly reflects needed energy imports. Sometimes it's about contraband, even though most enters through legal ports and primarily from other sources. Sometimes it's border security, even though that border has been secure for decades. Sometimes it's just territorial ambition. Look, the actual driver seems simpler and more concerning. Viewing international relationships purely transactionally, where only winners and losers exist. Seeing a neighbour's prosperity as your loss. Interpreting mutual benefit as weakness. Viewing partnership as exploitation. Believing power means never accommodating, compromising or treating others as equals. That might work in business deals where you can walk away and wait for better terms. In geopolitics, consequences don't freeze, they accumulate. Partners don't wait, they find alternatives, build new relationships, restructure around your absence. And when you want back in, the prices increase substantially. And that restructuring is happening right now. Canada is restructuring as we speak. Not quickly, not easily, but methodically. Internal trade barriers falling. New export partnerships forming. Critical mineral development accelerating. Defence spending increasing. And most importantly, political consensus around not depending solely on America has solidified. If the goal was pressure toward accepting American terms, it's failing. If the goal was demonstrating strength, it's demonstrating self-isolation. If the goal was prosperity, consumers are poorer and businesses less competitive. If the goal was securing resource access, those resources are flowing toward China and Europe instead. Here's the bottom line, and this is what I really want you to understand. The statement "we don't need them" isn't just economically incorrect, it's strategically dangerous. It reflects fundamental misunderstanding of how modern economies function, how alliances work, and how power operates in an interconnected world. Two countries with a 10-to-1 population difference built one of history's most successful economic partnerships. It benefited both not equally in every sector, not without friction, but substantially and sustainably. It survived world wars, cold wars, recessions, political transitions, and countless policy disagreements. It's now being dismantled not because it failed, but because one leader decided it wasn't serving interests sufficiently, and the costs are becoming apparent in real time. Let me tell you what's coming next. By the time we hit that July 2026 review, Canada enters with more leverage than expected, diversified markets, secured alternatives, demonstrated ability to withstand economic pressure. America enters having alienated its largest trading partner, damaged credibility globally, and shown trade policy is subject to dramatic reversals based on personal grievances. The irony: an America-first approach has made America more isolated, vulnerable, and less influential. The tragedy: repairing these relationships takes decades. Trust, once lost, isn't easily regained. Partnership, once rejected, isn't casually resumed. So when America says we don't need them, what's really being said is we're willing to find out. And we are finding out. Results are measurable, consequences are accumulating, and the world is watching, learning and adapting. Look, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Do you think this relationship can be repaired, or are we watching permanent realignment of North American economics and geopolitics? Because that's what's actually at stake here. Not a trade dispute, not political theatre, but fundamental restructuring of one of the world's most important bilateral relationships. Whatever comes next will shape North American prosperity, security, and influence for generations. That's where we are, that's what's happening, and that's why it matters more than most people realize. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.